Amelie sat at the dinner table in the busy city of Lagos, believing her family would give her comfort. With a trembling voice, she told them the truth. She had lost her job, she was living in a tiny one-room apartment where cockroaches crawled on her bowls, and every night she survived on nothing but cheap instant noodles. She hoped for a little kindness, maybe even advice. Instead, the room filled with laughter, not joy but cruel mockery. Her father shook his head and called her the shame of the family. Her mother said she would never rise above poverty, and her siblings smirked as if her pain was a joke. The words cut deeper than knives. For a moment, Amelie felt her whole world collapse right there at the table. She wanted to disappear, to shrink into silence. But then, as their cruel laughter echoed in her ears, something else woke up inside her. It was not weakness anymore, but fire. That night, lying in her hot little room with roaches scratching in the corners, she stared at the ceiling and whispered to herself, "They think I will stay down forever. They think I will never rise. Watch me." Her heart was broken, but her spirit was lit with a new strength. The very family that tried to crush her had unknowingly given her the spark to fight, to build, and to prove them all wrong. It was the beginning of a story they would never forget. Amelie's small room smelled like sweat and stale oil, and the paint on the walls was peeling in long dry strips. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling and flickered when the wind pushed through the cracked window, and at night the light made the cockroaches gleam as they ran across the bowls she used for food. She ate the same packet of ramen so many nights that the brand name was burned into her memory. Neighbors passed her door and shook their heads with pity, whispering that she did not look well, that life had been hard on her. Once, her sister's voice came back to her like a recording, "You'll die poor, and no one will remember you." Those words might have broken someone else. For Amelie they landed like stones on water and then sank, making a deep pool where something new could grow. She learned the shape of the room by heart, the exact place a roach would hide, the crack in the floor where dust collected, the thin blanket that did not keep out the cold. She learned to be careful with money down to the last naira. Where others might have seen only failure, she began to see a plan forming in the tiny space. At night, when the city slept and the cockroaches clicked their tiny feet, Amelie sat on the floor with her phone and a cheap notebook and started to read. She watched free videos, copied lessons into her notebook, and practiced the same small steps again and again until they felt familiar. She taught herself to build a simple web page, then another. She learned how to write a message that made someone want to buy something, how to take a picture that made a small item look like something worth more. Every packet of noodles became a promise, one more day of saying no to things she did not need, one more night of learning instead of sleeping. When neighbors patted her shoulder with pity she only smiled and kept working. She kept a small ritual to remind herself of why she started. Before she slept, she would hold the empty ramen packet in her hand and say quietly, "Watch me." The words felt small in the beginning but grew heavy with meaning. She imagined a door that opened to sunlight, an address that people would notice, a table where she would invite no one until she chose to. She wrote lists on the back of old receipts and crossed things off, and each cross felt like a small victory against the voice that said she would never rise. The room stayed the same, the roaches still came, but inside Amelie something changed. The hellhole that others used to shame her became the place she tested herself, the place she practiced being someone who could refuse pity, who could turn hunger into discipline and laughter into fuel. Every small skill she learned, every night she stayed up instead of giving up, stacked like bricks until a house, one day, would be possible. Amelie's days began before the sun rose and often ended long after midnight. In the morning she dressed in the same worn black skirt and blouse and rushed into the crowded buses that smelled of sweat and dust, heading to the call center where chaos ruled every hour. Phones rang without pause, customers shouted in anger, and supervisors barked orders. She forced her voice to stay calm, polite, and steady while inside her body felt like breaking. The pay was small, barely enough to cover rent and food, but Amelie did not complain. She knew the call center was only one side of her life, a mask she wore while hiding her real fight. When her shift ended, while others went home to rest, she went back to her little room, set down her cheap second-hand laptop, and started again. The nights were harder than the days. Her eyes burned with tiredness, but she refused to stop. She taught herself to code by copying lines of code from tutorials, testing them, failing, and trying again until the screen finally showed what she wanted. She read about digital marketing, about how one post could turn into sales, about how a small business online could grow without a shop or a signboard. Slowly she began to practice, building websites for strangers who found her through small ads. At first she was paid only a little, but every naira she earned outside her call center job felt like proof that her future was possible. While her family spent their money on fake gold chains, loud parties, and borrowed cars just to show off, Amelie saved every coin. She skipped treats, skipped outings, skipped anything that slowed her dream. Then came the message from a man in Accra, Ghana, a quiet investor who had noticed her work. He told her he believed in her determination and was ready to fund her ideas if she was willing to work harder than ever. Amelie did not hesitate. She built small online businesses, some failed, some succeeded, but she treated each one like a lesson. When one business grew, she sold it for profit and used that money to start another. The cycle was brutal, but Amelie was relentless. Every cruel laugh from her family replayed in her mind like fuel, every insult was turned into energy. She promised herself she would never again beg anyone for support, never again be mocked for being poor. 3 years passed like a blur of phone calls, late nights, endless screens, and countless sacrifices. Then one day Amelie opened her bank account and stared at numbers she never thought she would see. Her balance told a different story now, one of patience, of hunger, of fire that refused to die. She was no longer the girl eating ramen in silence. She was the woman secretly building an empire that nobody, not even her mocking family, could have imagined. The sun was high in the sky the day Amelie walked into the grand office to sign the papers. The air smelled of fresh polish and wealth, so different from the damp room she once called home. The documents lay neatly on the glass table, thick with numbers that would have once made her dizzy, but now she read them with calm eyes. Her pen moved across the lines with a steady hand, each signature feeling like a strike against every cruel word that had once broken her. Outside the office windows, she could already see the mansion waiting, standing proud on the same street her family used to drive past just to humiliate her. They would slow their car, point at the rich homes, and remind her that she would never belong there. Now, that same street would carry her name. The mansion rose like a dream made solid. Its white stone walls gleamed in the sunlight, the gates tall and strong as if guarding her victory. Inside, the marble floors shone so brightly they mirrored her steps. Chandeliers sparkled from the ceilings, each crystal scattering light across the wide halls. The garden stretched far, filled with trimmed trees, flowers, and space that seemed endless compared to the small, dark room where she once slept. Every corner of the house whispered wealth, dignity, and triumph. The realtor, smiling with pride, placed the heavy keys in her hand. Amelie closed her fingers around them, and in that moment she remembered every night she had gone hungry, every evening when her family had laughed as she confessed her pain. She remembered the noodles that kept her alive, the roaches crawling over her bowls, the sting of her sister's voice saying she would die poor and forgotten. She remembered the neighbors who shook their heads in pity, the endless hours at the call center, the nights coding in the glow of her flickering bulb. She remembered the anger, the humiliation, the hunger that turned into fire. And now here she was, standing inside a mansion worth millions, built from the very determination they had mocked. Amelie walked slowly through the grand halls, running her fingers across the cool marble, listening to the sound of her own footsteps echoing like music. She paused in the wide dining hall, looked up at the chandelier above her, and felt tears press at her eyes, not from sadness but from victory. The world outside still moved as it always had, but her world had changed forever. She smiled, not because she wanted to brag, but because the girl who once whispered, "Watch me," had finally been heard. The keys in her hand were more than metal. They were proof that she had risen, that she had turned shame into power, and that the mansion nobody expected now belonged to her. The air in Lagos was already alive with the buzz of Christmas when Amelie made her move. Streets were filled with decorations, shops blasting carols, and people rushing to buy gifts. But in her mansion, behind tall iron gates, a different kind of excitement was unfolding. Amelie had decided to throw a Christmas party that the city would never forget. She spared no expense. The invitations alone were a statement, heavy cards wrapped in gold foil, embossed with her name in bold letters. They were hand-delivered to politicians, business leaders, celebrities, and respected neighbors. When people opened the envelope, the golden glow almost blinded them, and the whispers began immediately. The girl who once ate noodles in a roach-infested room was now hosting the grandest party in Lagos. But there was one twist that made the story even louder. Her parents, her siblings, the very people who had laughed at her pain, were not on the guest list. No card in gold foil reached their door. No invitation with her name came into their hands. Word spread like fire through the neighborhoods, carried on excited voices. Did you hear? Amelie's throwing a party, but her own family isn't invited. Some gasped in shock, others smirked in secret satisfaction, and many admired her courage. For once, Amelie was not the one people pitied. She was the one they envied. As the day drew closer, trucks rolled into her mansion delivering towering Christmas trees, strings of sparkling lights, and tables covered in fine linen. Chefs arrived with trays of roasted meats, golden rice, and desserts that looked like art. Waiters in white gloves prepared to serve champagne that popped with joy. The scent of fresh pine, roasted spices, and wealth filled the halls. Amelie watched it all in silence, her gown already chosen, her crown moment ready. The city buzzed even louder. Neighbors whispered behind closed doors, wondering what it must feel like to be her. Some said she was cruel to leave her family out, but others remembered the cruelty she had suffered and said she was simply giving back what she had been given. Amelie herself felt no guilt. She remembered too clearly the laughter at the dinner table, the mocking words that cut her like knives, the nights alone with hunger in her chest. This was not revenge for her, it was a celebration of survival. When the night finally came, the gates of her mansion opened wide to welcome Lagos' finest. Cars lined the street, guests stepped out in glittering clothes, and music filled the air. Amelie stood at the entrance, radiant in a dress that shimmered like stars, smiling as cameras flashed and people bowed in respect. Inside her halls, laughter rang out again, but this time it was hers. She was no longer the outcast, no longer the shame. She was the queen of the empire she built from ramen nights and cockroach walls, and the whole city knew it. The night of the Christmas party was glowing with lights, music, and laughter when Amelie's family finally broke. Word of the mansion had already spread through every corner of Lagos, and their neighbors no longer looked at them with pity but with questions. Is it true your daughter owns that palace? Did she invite you? The shame pressed down heavy, and desperation pushed them to act. They dressed in borrowed clothes that shimmered just enough to look expensive from a distance. Her father polished old shoes until they shone. Her mother pinned on fake jewelry that caught the light but not the heart. Her siblings walked with forced confidence, praying no one could tell that their outfits were stitched and rented. Together they marched to the gates of the mansion they once said Amelie would never touch. The sight of the mansion stunned them. White stone walls, tall gates, golden lights pouring from every window, it looked like a kingdom. They tried to slip in with the stream of luxury cars and glittering guests, hoping no one would notice. But Amelie's security was sharp and unshaken. The guards blocked them with firm arms and polite but unyielding words, "Your names are not on the list." For a moment, her family laughed nervously, pretending it must be a mistake. But the truth was written on the clipboard. They were outsiders now. Her mother's voice rose in panic, cracking with a mixture of pride and fear. "She's our blood," she shouted at the gates, hoping Amelie would hear. For years she had used those words to remind Amelie of her place, to shame her into silence. Now, for the first time, the words carried desperation instead of power. From inside, the sound of laughter, clinking glasses, and music spilled out, drowning their pleas. Guests in glittering gowns walked past them with curious glances, whispering about the uninvited family standing outside. Then Amelie appeared at the balcony above, her gown shimmering under the golden lights, her presence quiet but commanding. She looked down at the people who had once mocked her hunger, the ones who had laughed at her tears. Her voice carried through the night, cold and steady, "Blood doesn't pay the bills you mocked me for." The words fell heavy, echoing through the iron gates, slicing through the air sharper than any knife. Her family froze, their mouths open but no words left to speak. The music swelled behind her, and Amelie turned away without another glance. The guards stayed firm, the gates stayed closed, and the party roared on without them. Her family stood there, small and helpless in their borrowed clothes, watching as the world they once told her she would never enter now belonged completely to her. The desperation in their eyes was clear, but for Amelie, the moment was not about cruelty. It was about truth. She had finally shown them that the girl they had mocked was gone forever. The night inside the mansion glittered brighter than any star in the Lagos sky. Music floated through the halls, the air smelled of expensive perfumes, and glasses of champagne clinked like tiny bells. Amelie moved through the crowd with the grace of someone who had earned her crown. CEOs shook her hand, artists toasted to her, diplomats leaned in with respect when she spoke. Everywhere she turned, cameras flashed, capturing her smile, her gown that shimmered like liquid gold, and the power that now surrounded her. She had once been invisible, the girl nobody believed in, but tonight every eye in the room followed her. At the height of the night, she stepped onto the stage in the grand hall. The chandeliers above threw diamonds of light across her face as silence fell. Holding the microphone, she let the pause stretch, the kind of silence that demands attention. Her family's voices once told her she was nothing, that she would never rise. But now the only voices she heard were those waiting eagerly for her words. With steady confidence, Amelie announced the expansion of her real estate firm, a move that would spread her empire even wider across Africa. The hall erupted in applause, cheers bouncing off the marble walls, the sound wrapping around her like a crown of victory. Outside the gates, her family stood in the dark, listening to the roar of clapping hands they could not join. They pressed against the iron bars, their borrowed clothes wrinkling, their faces tight with desperation. Each cheer from inside the mansion was like a slap, each flash of a camera a reminder of the life they had thrown away with their cruelty. They had mocked her for eating ramen in a room filled with roaches, but now they were the ones locked out, pitted by strangers who passed by and whispered about their shame. Inside, Amelie raised her glass high, her smile calm but sharp. This was her moment of revenge, not with shouting or insults, but with undeniable success. She did not need to curse them, she did not need to let them in. The gates, the applause, the flashing lights, all of it spoke louder than words. Her guests clapped again and again, celebrating her power, while outside her family stood like shadows, unable to touch even the edges of her triumph. It was a perfect reversal. The humiliation they once poured on her had circled back and landed on them, heavier than they ever imagined. And Amelie did not flinch. She had given the world a show, a story of rising from roaches to riches, from ramen to chandeliers. But most of all, she had given her family the exact humiliation they thought would belong to her. Tonight, it was clear, the shame was no longer hers to carry. In the middle of Amelie's grand dining hall, where marble floors shone like mirrors and golden chandeliers spilled light across the room, there stood a single glass case. Inside it was nothing fancy, nothing expensive, just a packet of ramen noodles. Guests who walked past would pause, tilt their heads, and finally ask, "Why keep this here?" Amelie would smile softly, her gown glittering under the light, and say, "Because they laughed at this. And now, I laugh at them." Her words carried the weight of every night she had gone hungry, every insult that cut her, every cruel laugh at the dinner table. The guests always reacted the same way. Some gasped, some clapped instantly, and others whispered in awe. That packet of noodles was no longer just food. It was a symbol, a reminder that strength can grow in the darkest places. Soon the entire hall would break into applause, the sound swelling like thunder as they celebrated her courage, her rise, her story. Cameras flashed, glasses were lifted, and Amelie stood in the center, proud and unshaken. But outside the mansion gates, her family watched in silence. They could hear the clapping, see the lights, and even catch faint echoes of her words, but they could not step inside. The noodles they once mocked had become her crown, and their laughter had turned into chains that bound only them. Amelie had closed the circle. The shame was no longer hers to carry. The girl they had thrown aside was gone forever, replaced by a woman who had built an empire and sealed it with a single packet of ramen locked behind glass.